أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome everybody to Thursday's class. Jazakumullah for arriving very punctually. Let's start our class as always with our prayers. Let's call 1936. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, darling. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Okay, so we always start with prayers. Would you be able to recite the Dawood that's on the screen in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, then if everybody else can also follow along at home. Go for it, darling.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim.
And the tasbih as well, darling.
Bismillahir rahmanir rahim.
MashaAllah. Okay, so let's go to Thursday. This is our prayer for Thursday. Would you be able to recite that by yourself, darling?
Yes.
Okay.
Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a.
MashaAllah, mashallah. So, sweetheart, let's just go through that one more time, okay? And starting from, where's my hand? Here it is, okay? So, starting from here, repeat with me, okay? Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a. MashaAllah, mashallah. Very nice. Jazakumullah, sweetheart. Jazakumullah for coming to the mic. Lovely start to the class. And inshallah, we will meet you again on the mic. Okay? Assalamu alaikum for now. Allah Hafiz, darling. Okay, so if you just bear with me. Okay, so today, let's go to the right page. Okay, so today we have our lesson today is revision of the Waqf rules from lesson 21 in the Talimul-Qur'an. And the way we're going to do that is by having a quiz, because that's one of the best ways of learning. So we'll have a fun quiz in a short while. And then in the breakout rooms, you'll be reciting from Surah Al-Ma'idah, verses 112 to 116. And then when you come back, we will assign your homework. Okay, so if I can just check that the main teacher is also a co-host, please. If I can ask Central Admin to make the main teacher co-host also, because she will be my assistant for the quiz. Okay, so whilst we set up, let's look at the quiz. So we have a quiz today, and it's going to be based on this lesson, lesson 21, Rules of Waqf. And we've been going through these rules over the last 2 weeks, and we've been teaching you those and then going through some examples with them. And today we're going to have a quiz in order to really reinforce that you've actually understood them. Okay, so if I can just ask Central Admin to please make the main teacher a co-host also, because that way she'll be able to assist me in the quiz. Okay, so my main teacher is now co-host, so we will be able to do an interactive quiz. So now let's have a look at how we're going to do it. Waqf rules 1 to 11 is what we're going to test. And what you will find is that you will see questions displayed on your screen. And there will be multiple choice answers. And we want you to select what you think is the correct answer. When you've selected that on your phone or on your computer, whichever device you're on, then remember to press submit. If you're on your phone especially, sometimes the submit button is further down on your screen, so you'll have to scroll up. And until you press submit, your answer doesn't come through. And then we'll reveal the answer. And we want you to just enjoy the quiz. Okay, so let's get started. So question number 1, what is the correct pause here? Where it's highlighted, there's a meme with a dhammatain on the top. What is the correct pause here? Is it number 1? You can see here in the box here, number 1, alim, or number 2, is it alimun, or is it number 3, alime, or number 4, alimu? If you were to pause where it's highlighted, how would you pause? How would you read that meme? Okay, so we can close the poll now. And I can see that the vast majority of you have answered number 1. So let's have a look. Yes, indeed. It is number 1. The meme with the dhammatain will go to become a meme sakin. And that's because rule number 5 in that lesson applies. And let me just show you here. Again, rules of Waqf lesson 21. If you look at the highlighted bit, rule number 5 tells you that if you have a letter with a dhammatain and you pause on it, that dhammatain should be treated as a sukoon. Okay, so that was the rule that applied there. Okay, number 2. What is the correct pause here where it's highlighted? So if you're reading and then you get to that ha with the inverted dhamma, what would be the correct pause there? Is it what's written in number 1 here, where it's rasuluhu, or is it number 2, rasuluhu, or number 3, rasuluh, or number 4, rasuluhu? Which one will it be if you pause on the highlighted ha? Okay, so I'm apologizing for rushing you here. We lost a few minutes at the beginning. So let me see. The vast majority of you have said number 3. Okay, but a fair number of you have also said number 2 and number 4. Okay, so there's a little bit of confusion going on here. If you pause on an inverted dhamma, what do? So let's find out. The correct answer is that the inverted dhamma will become a sukoon. That's how you need to treat it. So when you read and then you pause there, you would say rasuluh. And let me just show you rule number 7. Rule number 7 there tells you that when you have an inverted dhamma, it just converts into a sakin, into a sukoon. So that's how you have to read it. Okay? Right, number 3. What is the correct pause here, where it's highlighted? A fathatain followed by an alif here. If you paused here, would it be number 1, naf'an, or would it be number 2, naf'a, or number 3, naf'an an, or number 4, naf'an a? Which one would it be? Okay, so the vast majority of you have said number 2. Okay, naf'a. So let's have a look. Yes, indeed, it is that. And that's because rule number 9 applies there. And let's have a look. Rule number 9 says that when you have this scenario with the fathatain, okay, when you pause on that, you treat that as a fatha followed by an alif. So a mad asli, if you use the Urdu term, okay. Okay, so let's have a look at number 4. What is the correct pause here? If you saw that, as-salati, what would you do if you were to pause at the end of that word? Would it be number 1, as-salat, with this there? Or would it be number 2, as-salati, exactly as it's written at the top? Or would it become as-salat with a ta marbuta at the end? Or number 4, as-salah. Which one would it be? Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. And if we can now have the answers. And the vast majority of you have said number 4, but a fair number of you are saying number 3. Number 3 being that the ta marbuta stays and the kasra gets swapped with a sukoon. Okay, so let's have a look what the correct answer is. It's actually number 4. And when you pause on this word, as-salati, okay, if you were to pause there, you would say as-salah. The ta marbuta will go to a ha sakin. And the rule that applies is rule number 8. And here it is, okay? Rule number 8 tells you that if you have a ta marbuta, it doesn't matter what stroke it's carrying, it doesn't matter whichever stroke, fathatain, dhammatain, kasratain, any stroke, it will always change to a ha sakin, always, okay? So it's one of the easiest rules to remember. If you see a ta marbuta and you're going to pause, it will always go to a ha sakin. Okay, so remember that, okay? This is how to use that rule. Okay, let's move to question number 5. If you were to see this word, dinihi, how would you pause at the end of that? Would it be number 1, dinihi, as if there's a ya mad, or number 2, dinihi, so with a kasra, or would it be exactly as it is, dinihi, which is number 3, or number 4, which is dinih? How would you pause if you were to pause at the end of that word? Okay, a few more seconds. And if we now have the results. Okay, so the vast majority of you have said it's number 4, that the vertical kasra gets treated as a sukoon. But a significant number of you are saying that it'll stay exactly as it is. So number 3. So let's have a look. Indeed, it is number 4. A vertical kasra becomes a sukoon on pause. And the rule that applies is rule number 6. And here it is, number 6. If you have a vertical kasra and you pause, the vertical kasra gets treated as a sukoon. Okay, so rule number 6 was applying there. Okay, let's move on to number 6. And what is the correct pause here? Biqawmin. If you were to be reading that and then you ran out of breath and you decided to pause, would you read that as number 1, biqawmin, exactly as it's written, or biqawm, number 2? Or would it be the third option, biqawmin, or the fourth option, biqawmi? How would you pause if you were to pause at the end of that word? Okay, if we have the results. Okay, so the vast majority of you are saying number 2, and a significant number of you are saying number 4. And actually a fair number of you are saying number 3. So there's some confusion going on here, okay? When you have a kasratain, the way you would pause is this. The kasratain gets treated as a sukoon. And the reason for that is that there's a rule number 4, which is applying. And let me show you. When you have a kasratain, that gets treated as a sukoon when you pause on it, okay? So rule number 4 is applying there. Okay, let's move on to number 7. Ukhra. If you were to see that word and then you pause there, how would you pause? Would you be reciting as is written in number 1? Ukhra, ukhra. So you pronounce the ya. Or is it number 2? Ukhri, as if it's a ya mad. Or is it number 3? Ukhra. Or is it number 4? Ukhray. What is the correct pause at the end of that word? Okay, few more seconds, and if we have the results now. Okay, so answers are quite varied. The number 1 answer is number 3, but a significant number have chosen the other options. So let's have a look. If we had this scenario where there was a vertical fatha followed by this ya, we would pause, as is the case on number 3. We would treat that as an alif mad. Okay, so in practice, the difference would be no difference in sound. Ukhra is how it's written, and ukhra is how you would read it. But let's have a look at the rule that's been applied there. It's rule number 10 in the lesson 21. When you have that situation, a vertical fatha followed by that ya, you basically treat it no differently in sound. Okay, you make the sound for 2 counts. This is rule number 10 that applies. Okay, let's go to number 8. If you saw this and you were going to pause, waliyukumu, if that's what you were seeing, but you needed to pause there, how would you pause? Would it be as in number 1, waliyukumu, exactly as it's written, or number 2, waliyukum, or number 3, waliyukumu? So you make it into a waw mad. Or is it number 4, waliyukumun? How would you pause there? Okay, a few more seconds. I do apologize for rushing you, but we're going to be running way over time otherwise. So if you can have the answers. Okay, vast majority of you have said number 2, so let's have a look. Yes, indeed. You've said it's number 3. And that is a correct answer because of a rule number 3 that's applying there, which tells you that when you pause on the dhamma, you treat it as a sukoon. Okay, so that's why that was read in that way. Okay, let's move on to the next question, number 9. If you were to pause at the end of this word, alayhi, how would you pause? Would you read it as number 1, alayha, or number 2, alayhi, or number 3, alayhi, exactly as it's written, or alayh? What is the correct way of pausing there? Okay, if you can now have the answers. Okay, so the vast majority of you said number 4. So let's have a look. Yes, indeed. When you pause on a kasra, the rule number 2 is the one that applies. A kasra changes into a sukoon, and that's why you read that with a sukoon at the end. Okay, well done. What is the correct pause here? If we were reading that and we saw that fatha on the noon at the end of the verse, how would we pause there? Would we read that as a noon with a kasra, or number 2, noon with a fatha as it's written, or a sakin noon as number 3, or number 4, a mazmum noon with a dhamma? What is the way to pause on that noon at the end of a verse? Okay, so apologies to rush, but if we can now have the answers. So the vast majority of you have said number 3. If you see a fatha and it's at the end of a verse, you would make it into a sukoon. And yes, indeed, that is correct because it's rule number 1 in that lesson that applies. If you pause on a fatha, it becomes a sukoon. Well done. Now, further along in the same bit of text, there is a noon with a fatha there. Let's say that you're reading and then you ran out of breath at that point. So you're in the middle of a verse and you needed to pause. How would you pause on that noon with a fatha? Would you pause as number 1, exactly as it's written, noon with a fatha? Or number 2, would you make it into a sakin noon? Or would you recite it as if it had a kasra? Or number 4, would you recite it as if it was madmoom with the dhamma? What is the correct answer? Okay, a few more seconds. And if we now have the answers. Okay, so the vast majority of you have said number 2, that fatha on top of the noon, that maftu noon becomes a sakin noon. And let's have a look. Yes, indeed. And that's the case because rule number 1 applies, where if you pause on a letter with the fatha, it becomes treated as a sukoon. And it doesn't matter if it's in the middle of a verse as it is here, or if it's at the end of a verse. The rule applies no matter where you are, okay? Let me just go back here, okay? So a fatha always becomes a sukoon if you pause on it. Okay, question number 12. If we were to pause there on that wow with the fatha on the top, if we were to pause there, how would we recite at that point? Would we say, as is number 1, huwa, exactly as it's written in the text? Or would we make that wow with the fatha into a sakin wow and read that as hu? Or would we change the ha from a madmum ha, because it has a dhamma on it at the moment, would we treat that as a maftuha and say how? Or would we decide that that wow with the fatha becomes a hamza sakin and say hu? What is the correct way of pausing on that highlighted bit there? Okay, a few more seconds, and if we have the results. Okay, so the vast majority of you have said number 2. Okay, so let's have a look. Yes, indeed, that is the correct way of pausing. And this example has been put in there, especially just to point out to you that sometimes when you make a pause, a letter that's carrying a fatha, as is the case here, becomes sakin because a rule applies. But be careful because sometimes, especially as is this case, that may become a wow mud. So you have to make sure that you do read it as a wow mud when you pause. So for 2 counts, okay? Okay, and then just to reinforce your understanding, rule number 1, a fatha always becomes a sukoon on pause. Okay, so here, what is the correct pause here? Okay, where it's highlighted. Would you read it as ya with the vertical kasra becomes ya sakin, so you would read it as yuhyi? Or would you read it as number 2, yuhyi? Or number 3, yuhi, as if the ya was a ya mad? Or would you read it exactly as it's written, yuhyi? What is the correct way of pausing that? Okay, if we can now have the results. Okay, so fairly well distribution across all of the answers. No one's really sure what the correct answer is. Okay, so let's have a look. It's number 4. You read it exactly as it's written. Okay, ye. And why? Because rule number 11 applies. If you have that situation, there is no change. You read it exactly as it's written. Okay. Let's move on here. Okay, so what you see there, if you just ignore that yellow box for a minute, you see Suratul Baqarati. That's what's written there. Okay, so I'm sure you know what I'm saying there. Suratul Baqarati, 2nd chapter in the Holy Quran. If you were to pause on the ta al-marbuta that's circled in the yellow, how would you pause there? Would you read that as Suratul, because you sort of have to read the al that's coming up afterwards? Or would you read it as number 2, suratu? So you read the dhamma as it's written. Or would you read it as surat, which is number 3? Or would you say surah? What is the correct way of pausing there? A few more seconds, and if we have the results. Okay, so the vast majority of you have said number 4, but a significant number have also said number 3. So you're a little bit confused whether the dal marbuta should go to a sakin dal marbuta or whether it should go to a ha sakin. So let's have a look. The correct answer is number 4, and that's because rule number 8 applies. A dal marbuta, it doesn't matter what stroke it carries, always changes to a ha sakin. Okay, so that word suratu becomes surah. Okay, so same thing, suratul baqarati. If you were to pause right at the end there, okay, where the yellow box is, how would you read that dal marbuta there? Would it be al baqaratun, or number 2, al baqarah, or al baqarat, or al baqarati? Which of those options applies? What is the correct answer to number 15? And a few more seconds, and if we now have the results. Okay, so the vast majority have said number 2, okay, but still a fair number of you have said number 3, and there is a certain number that are saying the other answers. So let's have a look. The correct answer is al-Baqarah, okay, number 2, and that's because rule number 8 applies. A dal marbuta, whatever stroke it carries, always becomes a ha sakin. Okay, and that's why you would read that as a ha sakin. Okay, so that concludes our quiz. But I hope that you've understood that when it comes to Waqf rules, and I hope also that the teachers can now take note as well, Waqf rules, students have a certain amount of difficulty in understanding. And there's no short way of working out and learning these rules other than just to keep on referring back to this lesson. So always have this lesson at hand, and if ever you want to pause and you're not sure, refer to this because the rules are fairly well clear. These 11 rules are the ones that you need to know for NL1. So when you're pausing, and if you forget, or even if you're fairly sure, just refer back and then you'll be able to understand how to properly pause. Okay, and next week, in all of your practice text, we will, although we're moving on to other things, we will regularly be picking up on Waqf rules so that you have plenty of time to understand the rules. Okay, so I do apologize for going over on time, but these rules, from experience, I know are a little confusing for students, and so we've taken some time and we had some problems at the beginning. So Jazakumullah, if I can now hand over to Central Admin to open up the breakout rooms, please go and enjoy with your teachers, and inshallah we'll meet again at the other end of the class. Assalamu alaikum.